Assalamu alaikum. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, good afternoon. I'd like to start by thanking Dr. John Duke Anthony and the National Council for the gracious invitation for me to speak to you today. First of all, and while I'm absolutely glad to speak to you, I'm also anxious to go back home because we've got a big celebration soon with the World Cup, and well, you're all invited. I'll see you there. But before I start, I have to start with the obligatory conference caveat that I must be clear that I'm not speaking on behalf of my government or any of its agencies. Rather, I am speaking today as a researcher, a defense fellow, and an observer of the impact of international relations and defense policies in the Middle East and North Africa, or MENA for short. And as an observer, there are two main areas of interest for me currently that I would like to touch on briefly today before we delve deeper into the Q&A. First, I would like to talk about something Dr. Anthony mentioned, the importance of small states and small state security in the modern MENA region, and how it affects and is affected by global trends and threats. It is vital to understand the growing role that small and medium states play today and will continue to be more prominently in the future. Small and medium states in the MENA region today have more effect on the global economy and defense than ever before, whether in the global energy market and its impact, or agility and efficiency in military support operations, logistics, and humanitarian aid. Again, Dr. Anthony mentioned Qatar's role with its partners in the region and Central Command in the evacuation of the refugees and others from Afghanistan. The rapidly changing sphere of influence of small and medium states in the MENA region and their impact on regional global security is of great interest, and it should be, in my opinion, observed and closely studied. The second area of interest, while it relates very closely, I want to talk about it relates very closely to the first, is the importance of the policy to capability approach in procurement and in other areas, or P2C, and definitely not the other way around. How a modern and robust defense policy is needed to inform current capability implementation and future procurement and integration. It is vital, in my view, for security that the MENA region have developed sound policies that inform capabilities to avoid irrational procurement of the next generation capability for the sake of it, and rather to implement those capabilities for global good through supporting security sector reform and humanitarian aid. And those areas of development policies and doctrine, I believe, I believe that the United States has a significant role to play in helping the MENA region advance in its own indigenous abilities to inform and formatting sound policies that lead to well-implemented and effective capabilities. Finally, I would like to leave you with two quotes that have informed me greatly about the views I've just laid out today, the 2 points that I've made. The first is from His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, the Emir of the State of Qatar, who spoke this year at the session of the UN General Assembly when he said, and I quote, "Small and medium-sized countries are in most need of stable rules regarding international relations, since dependency on the great powers should only be the reason for failure to maintain communication between us. Each of us has a role to play, and what seems impossible today may become an achievable reality when there is a vision and will and good intentions." The second quote comes with a certain amount of personal pride and joy as an Arab. The Arabs, through Morocco, as I'm sure many of you know, were the first to recognize the United States of America as a sovereign nation. And when writing to the Sultan of Morocco, President George Washington said, in part, and I quote, "Our soil is bountiful, our people industrious, and we have reason to flatter ourselves that we shall gradually become useful to our friends." In these areas that I've laid out and mentioned today, more than any other in the MENA region and in these volatile times, our friends can be very useful indeed. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much. Probably for the person who asked the question, specifically, trust could be distilled in a actionable or real-world manifestation as partnership. And the elements of partnership that GCC nations have shown and cooperated with the US has been reliability throughout, level-headedness throughout, and proven through the third element, which is time. So time and time again has shown the level-headedness and reliability of GCC nations, either in a unified or individual manner with the United States. That proves the value of partnership, which is, in my view, the real-world manifestation of that trust.
Super.
Okay. Can we get to the questions?
Yes. One of the aspects of partnership that Sheikh Nawaf just mentioned, the analogy could be a marriage. And the marriage between the United States and a number of its Arab friends, allies, and strategic partners has just been that, a Catholic marriage, if you will. But like any marriage, there are ups and downs in a long, lasting marital relationship. But then there are those that don't work out. And that don't work out first and foremost because of trust. One side sees the other cheating on the other, or inadequate to the other, or not living up to the promises that the other made at the beginning of that particular partnership. So there's friction, and then there's reluctance, and there are delays, and there are those who said, yes, we'll get around to it. Oh, thank you, but no thank you, all the best, keep in touch. It's been a great relationship. There's that aspect at play here. There is friction in the relationship. There are those who say that we are not worthy of trust because of what Iran has been able to get away with, not just in the case of Yemen, but also in the case of Iraq. Imagine any of us could get into a Jeep now or a Land Rover and drive all the way from Tehran to Beirut without a visa, without really being stopped or seriously delayed in any water between Tehran and the Eastern Mediterranean. This has not happened for several thousand years. If you're an Iranian, again, put yourself empathetically in the shoes of an Iranian. All this talk about, well, we're going to stay in Syria till the last Iranian leaves, or we're going to curb Iran's influence in Iraq, Lebanon can only be brought back and made whole again if the Lebanese factor with Hezbollah can be reduced to minuscule influence on the sidelines. All of this, to me, layperson here, Army veteran though, is BS. From an Iranian's perspective, Iranians are on a roll and a run. And for reasons that Colonel DeRose alluded to earlier this morning, they don't have to win. They can just disrupt. And they can disrupt for $100, they mentioned, in terms of the add-on to one of the drones. They can do this by embarrassing the American aerospace and defense industry that sells billions to the region and yet cannot effectively defend against a several $100 weapon that comes and attacks the nerve center of the global energy industry that fuels the economies of every single country on a big and small, old and new, and everything in between. So this partnership aspect, when it's being frayed, needs to be taken seriously and favorable into consideration and raised up on the inbox and the priority list there of do not let it go from being frayed to separation. And there are calls for separation now. This is dangerous talk. This is loose talk. This is political talk at a political season. We're less than 2 weeks away from a national election in my country that can be fraught with implications. And we're mindful through the rearview mirror of history of 1956. In the late October early November period. This was when the Soviet Union rolled into Budapest. After all of us saying to the Hungarians, all you need to do is rise up, be freedom fighters, we'll be with you, we've got your back. They did. We did nothing. And it is because we were distracted nationally, politically, rent and wrought domestically, and divided. And guess what else happened? France invaded Egypt that same week. Great Britain invaded Egypt that same week. Israel invaded Egypt that same week and shut the Suez Canal to benefit from one country, Israel, but to the disadvantage of the entire rest of the world that had its shipments on the naval highways to go around the Cape of Good Hope rather than through the Suez Canal, and it stayed shut for the better part of a year. And again in June '67, when the Israelis again invaded Egypt, and the canal stayed shut for 8 years. And of course, Israeli generals said, oh, that's the greatest anti-tank ditch one could ask for or imagine. Well, for one country to gain and 200 others to be disadvantaged doesn't deserve any comment beyond the implications of that, which was severe and serious and mustn't be allowed to occur again. Colonel DeRoche, you had a question that you asked.
Well, we have questions here, so if it's all right with you, I'd like to take we have quite a few audience questions.
Sure.
Okay. Reemphasizing that all three panelists do not speak for their government, we have the first question, which is for the whole panel. I'll ask, since we're out of time, this is going to be the lightning round with short answers. Will any Arab country ever get the U.S. F-35 plane? Do you want to take a whack at that first, Sheikh?
Since it's the lightning round, I don't know.
I don't know. Okay, Abbas?
Depends.
Depends. Okay, my answer is, based on current demographic trends, the first Arab country to get the Joint 35 will be Israel. All right, next. The serious answer is the technology requires a lot more safeguarding, but, you know, technology moves forward. You know, the Norden bomb site was considered to be a, great matter of state in World War II. By 1953, you could buy one and display it in a high school auditorium. So stealth has its own special requirements, and quite frankly, even, Turkey is not an Arab state, and it ran amok of that, and we're finding other countries having problems as well.
Let me add one more thing.
Sure.
If your enemy is your next door neighbor and within reach, I think F-35 in your inventory is kind of overkill. F-35 is designed to project forces way beyond your national territorial integrities in a stealth mode. So most of the countries in the region, they're looking for defensive weapons more than just weapons to project and conduct wars outside their territorial integrity.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Next question. We'll go with you this time, and you're going to have to give us a proper answer. Is there a realistic chance of Arab self-reliance in defense? Is reform likely to work?
Well, it actually depends. But as I mentioned in my opening remarks, it should start with clear policies. Without clear policies that inform the procurement of capabilities, the formations of doctrine, as you mentioned, Dave, that would inform the way militaries work together in a joint or combined theater, it is difficult to see how these reforms could happen. Now, there are many countries in the Arab and the Middle East and North Africa that have various degrees of reforms. We're not going to get into the details of that, but more is needed, and I don't think we're there yet.
Excellent.
Well, transformations and reform is an ongoing thing. Even within the United States government, we're always learning and from lessons learned from conflicts and from somebody else. So I don't think the reason for that is the threat is always evolving, and as long as the threat is evolving, regardless how much you transform or reform, you're going to continue doing that to mirror the threat. I mean, ideally, like the United States would like to predict the future threat, the future force 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road, but it's all guessing. But as long as you have a force that is loyal to the country and they're serving with purpose, I think regardless of the threat out there, you'll be able to somewhat at least stop it initially to figure out what else you need to do or who you need to call to help you if needed.
Those are both perfect answers. I cannot add anything to that. Next question from Abdulaziz Al-Anjari, our friend from Reconnaissance Research. Are we prepared for a post-Khomeini Iran? An Iran ruled, and he thinks that may be an Iran ruled directly by the Revolutionary Guard. Are we prepared for a post-Khomeini Iran? I'm sorry.
I think the question should be, are we prepared for the current situation that is evolving? We cannot see the end state of a deal with Iran or a no deal with Iran. That is unclear. I think understanding the current situation before jumping to conclusions that Iran will have a change in its hierarchy structure anytime soon. Unless Iran itself or the people of Iran or jointly with its neighbors find a way for Iran to behave differently or continue to behave as it is, that will definitely have a reflect on the government of Iran moving forward, whether under the current regime or any other regime.
Okay.
I agree. Iran has to change to become, at least to play with as a good neighbor in the region. The thing is, the question also is not for Iran. The question is for the neighboring countries, including the United States. What is our role when Iran changes? How are we going to deal with it?
Yeah, good point.
David, if I can add to that a brief thing.
How dare you?
I've been fortunate enough to be invited to all of the GCC's ministerial and heads of state summits there. And in the communique of each and every one of them from the beginning in 1981 in May has been the emphatic emphasis on non-intrusion in the domestic affairs of other countries. And here you've had since 1979 Iran with the only constitution, to my knowledge, in the world that obligates the government to expand its revolution to the nearby areas. The nearby areas are the GCC countries, plus Afghanistan and Pakistan to the east, but Iraq, Turkey to the west, and to the south, Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman. You have this kind of a situation that until it's dropped from the agenda of the Iranian national security objectives, it is difficult to conceive of its neighboring countries being other than alarmed, threatened, insecure, in need of assistance. None of them are naive enough to think that they can handle Iran alone. Iran is pushing 100 million now. The 6 GCC countries, 25 million. Iraq, 30 million now. The 7 combined are barely half of what Iran is. So no one is naive about the demographic manpower aspect about it. So plan B is to align one's strategic interests with other powers that are greater powers whose interests align more nearly with your own. And therein lies the nexus of the partnership between Qatar, between the rest of the GCC countries and the United States, where the interests are indeed aligned at the present time. Whether they will remain so depends a lot on the policies of both.
Okay, good. I would just say that the three military members of the panelists reflect a professional bias. So a threat is determined by capabilities and intentions. Military folks inherently focus on capabilities because they say we can't accurately gauge the intentions. Sometimes diplomats and intelligence experts will speak of the intentions. So I think that all three of us have focused on the intentions and say you have to do that. And I would suggest that reflects a professional bias. So, you know, want a different answer? Don't ask a soldier. Next question, is integrated air and missile defense sufficient to maintain security and superiority over the Iranian threat for the Gulf, or are offensive missile and bomb reserves necessary as a deterrent? Abbas?
I don't think it's sufficient. I mean, the best way to counter any incoming missiles or UAV is to hit it at the source before they even launch, and that's mainly with intelligence to figure out intentions, and perhaps even before that to try to interdict some of the supplies in terms of parts and instead of technology that comes to Houthis or to Iran. And the current threat now is not long-range missiles where you need THAAD and you need Patriot missiles. It's just all this off-the-shelf type unmanned aerial vehicles like the one you showed in the picture, where you just have unmanned aerial vehicle and you put artillery around on it and deliver it and they just drop it. Let the gravity takes its hold and bring it right down on the target. So it's actually more accurate than an artillery round, because you need to fire forward observers and you have to correct. So those integrated air and defense missiles are good if we expect in Russia or maybe or China or try to use some of their long-range missiles. But it is needed. It is also shows that at a minimum it'll provide you with early warning. So that's something part of the before you even destroy any incoming missile or thing. That early warning is important for all participating countries. So once you have that warning, whether it's a small rocket or a small UAV or whatever it is, it gives leadership time to react and figure out how they want to intercept this threat. And there's many ways to do so. So there's early warning part of it, but not 100% sufficient. Necessary, but not sufficient.
Yeah, Sheikh Kamal?
While I'm not an air defense expert, I just want to touch on another subject, because I'm seeing a lot of questions going into the operational side of things. I think we have to step back and look at the bigger picture for a second. Iran as a state is not going anywhere. As a country, it's physically there, it's a neighbor. I think people of the Gulf should find peaceful manners before, jumping towards the inevitability in their minds, or in many minds, that a conflict will and shall, and in some cases, and in some people may view, must happen. So I think we should always keep a broader mind and thought towards Iran as a neighbor. Peaceful solution should be the first option. And for those who've never tried war and have never wanted to see death, shouldn't jump too fast to that inevitability, if that would be an inevitability.
Well, that's wisdom indeed. I mean, the most efficient defense is to convert your enemies into friends. The United States, of course, fought 3 wars with Canada, and only to see them now continue to subvert us from within. But we have an undefended border. Let me just speak technically about the nature of defense. So, first off, the general public misunderstands the nature of missile defense. They think it is a dome that covers a wide area. Missile defenses are point defenses, and they have a very limited ability. There's a very limited area you can cover. And so if you do not have some sort of offensive deterrent, if you do not attack them at the point, you will leave a large portion of your terrain exposed. For a relatively short, compact place like Israel, you can actually defend it fairly effectively, but for most countries, you cannot. The second point is there's an economic factor here. Patriot PAC-2 GEMS-T missile costs $4.3 million each. and $4.3 million each. And standard practice in advanced air forces is to fire 2 missiles at each incoming target. A Zulfiqar missile costs less than $100,000, so you have an uneconomical rate of exchange. So they're just on economy and in terms of protecting all of your country, it makes sense that you have to integrate some form of a strike capability against launch points and targeting points in order to have that. Next question. What is the U.S. national military strategy with Saudi, or this could apply to other countries as well, modernizing its military to China? Is there a military strategy to counter Chinese influence in partner nation militaries? I don't think we'll ask you to answer this one, is it?
I don't even know the answer.
Good. And that's why I wanted to spare you the embarrassment. Abbas, you want to take a whack at that?
Well, one way to counter China is to stay engaged with our partner nations and basically try to supply them with U.S. equipment. I mean, if the country acts according to their threat, according to their doctrine, they need a special capability. And if the United States says, well, yeah, we have this capability, but you can't have it, but China has it, or Russia has it, there's a possibility they might do something like that. I mean, in the case of the Gulf nations, especially Saudi Arabia, I mean, this bond between the United States and Saudi Arabia is going to stay for a long time, especially on the defense side. Both needs each other from a defense posture. I mean, Saudi Arabia provides a very strategic location in the world. I mean, for defense posture, even if you are in the future there's any kind of deterrence or countering China, this is a launching point for the United States. So the other thing is just enhance. The more you work with your friends, the less you keep China away. I mean, in the African continent, for a while, the AFRICOM, the African Command, was one of the missions is to counter China and make sure that the Chinese are not in Africa. And now they're already all over Africa. Now the mission is not to counter China. The mission is to sit with China along with the partner nations to work together in Africa. So there's no it depends on each country, but you have to more partnership with countries and more defense cooperation and more political dialogue with them to counter China.
David, can I comment briefly on this? Yes, with regard to the China aspect, I remember being in the region in March of 1987, where Saudi Arabia had been asking, trying to ask for more than a year, could we have access to the Harpoon missile there to enhance our deterrence, and if deterrence doesn't work, to defense. And we kept saying, no, don't even ask. We don't have the votes in the Congress. Don't ask, and therefore you'll spare both of us an embarrassment, our raising your expectations and your expectations being dashed. Finally, Saudi Arabia's patience wore thin, and China drove its truck right through that gap of mistrust and uncertainty of intention there, and provided Saudi Arabia the CSS-2, so-called east wind, there, which could hit Tehran if it was accurate, 3,000 miles, much more threatening than the Harpoon missile there. So China got an enormous strategic advantage. We had a bloody nose, and the U.S. ambassador was asked to leave, deemed persona non grata, because the United States lectured Saudi Arabia for the audacity, the mendacity of your inviting godless, atheist, communist China to come to your defense, as opposed to still working with us to try to find some way out of this crisis. So yes, China has had leverage. It's used it, and we have been caught not as effective as we would like to be seen. Colonel DeRoche.
Thank you. Let me put it first off, just as Dr. Anthony says, China is not the preferred military partner in the Gulf. Generally, partners in the Gulf only buy military equipment from China if it is denied to the United States. The CSS-2 is one. The Wing Loon drone, when we refuse to sell armed drones, and people forget this, the United States actually is very restrictive on weapons sales. We refuse to sell armed drones to our partners, so both the UAE and Saudi Arabia bought the Wing Kowloon Chinese drone. The Chinese have recently provided lasers to be used in an anti-drone defense to certain forces in the Gulf who are regretting their purchase already. The only country that explicitly, and because of fears of sanctions, we've seen 155 millimeter howitzers and rounds sold to the Saudis, in large part, I would think, although nobody's explicitly told me, because members of Congress were saying we need to sanction stop providing weapons, so they wanted to have a source of artillery that was not subject to sanctions by the U.S. government. The one exception, the one nation that I know of that, in the Gulf at least, that buys Chinese weaponry without being denied it previously, is Kuwait, who quite frankly says our national existence has depended once on the acquiescence of the UN Security Council, and we are going to buy weapons from all the permanent members of the UN Security Council for a political thing. Now, on the harpoon, let me dispute you a bit. Ironically enough, Saudi Arabia here paid for the sins of the Iranians. When the Iranian Revolution occurred, we had transferred harpoon to the Iranians before the Saudis asked for it, and then we saw a regime change in Iran, and a harpoon was used against the USS Samuel B. Morse, which was unable to return to service after that. And so a restrictive policy came in because the United States government does not navigate towards the optimal solution. What it does is it veers away from the last disaster. And the last disaster was what was seen as careless provision of advanced weaponry to what was regarded as one of our most reliable allies in Iran, and then you had regime change, and so then we decided to not provide that advanced stuff, and unfortunately that led to the situation as you describe it. Final question, and this is a good one to end on. What role should the U.S. play in improving military conduct of Arab militaries? So we're talking about conduct here, not capabilities. Brigadier Nawaf, let's start with you.
Conduct as in?
How they conduct operations, and I believe it also refers to respect for human rights and conformance with the rule of warfare.
Well, I think what the United States is doing with a lot of the Arab states, Arab countries, whether in the Middle East or North Africa, training, continuing to explore ways of education and doctrine, disseminating a lot of that information is a good start, and I think that should continue with cooperation with those countries. Now, these varies. For instance, countries that have systems and laws, and I can speak only for the state of Qatar, that has a lot of humanitarian laws that have been updated in the past 5 and 10 years greatly, that reflect on each aspect of the government, including the military. Some countries may need to explore to develop their own humanitarian laws as well. But I think the United States should continue in cooperation and training and exercise. Education is the best remedy for most illnesses.
Well, I guess if you look at the question closely, I think first I have to define what is a good conduct. First, we have to agree on a good conduct. We can't just tell somebody to do something and we do something else. I mean, in general, the Arab countries, and I've worked with most of the Gulf states in military cooperation, and they all have, the same aspiration, the same thing we do. We all do training. We pretty much the same mission. As we got the same equipment. So it's. And it's all about training. Well, what distinguishes the United States from the rest is training. We train a lot. We train daily. We train on an individual level. We train at the unit level, all the way to division levels. We train during the day, during the night. We say United States own the night because we can operate at night. Most of the other countries, even recently we saw Russia. Obviously, you see Russia. I don't think they have trained lately before they crossed borders to Ukraine. That wasn't a coherent attack. Wasn't a coherent attack against Ukraine. So it's and in war things happen. I don't think there is a policy in the Arab countries that to do bad conduct. There is no such thing. But you'll have some units or some people who do bad conduct. So I think at the end of the day is it's transparency and joint training at the individual level and at the unit level. All participants will share a common conduct. and whatever it is that good conduct is.
I agree with both of those. I would point out that in some people there's a false distinction between military capability and issues such as corruption and human rights and all that. But when you're dealing with a democracy like the United States as your security partner, eventually you cannot keep those issues separate. And what we saw with the Afghanistan withdrawal, for example, was the 20-year military commitment. Eventually people said, okay, when's the corruption going to end? When are we going to see an improved human rights situation? And ultimately, the lack of reform on human rights governance and anti-corruption in Afghanistan created an environment where it was possible to just withdraw in a humiliating manner. I apologize to all those whose questions we didn't get to, but please can we hear it for the panelists and for Dr. Anthony?